Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the sweet and sultry sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in Berkeley, California, and as always, I am joined by...
in sultry Houston, Texas, where it's still like in the 90s, Bob Bazanko.
Bob, before we get started, I just want to send some condolences that your bid for the speakership didn't really work out this week, and instead we've got MAGA Mike Johnson from Louisiana as the new Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I should have played the Bible card a little bit more. I just carried my Bible with me a little bit more.
Maybe you can write a memoir and call it "What Happened." So
it's
that joke never gets old.
This is a banana republic. I mean, it's a banana republic when a guy like that, who no one had ever heard of, who's just utterly fucking insane, is now like the third most powerful person in the government, right?
Yeah. Like he was like a insurrection plotter or whatever you call it.
Emmer was too liberal, and they had to kneecap him. So it's scary shit. We're going to talk a little bit more about politics later.
We could call Mike Johnson the Jim Jordan without the baggage, if you will.
Yeah, like why did they? That's how bad. Think of how bad Jordan is and how disliked he is. That they got rid of him and they got a guy who maybe even crazier.
Absolutely.
Jim Jordan with a jacket on, but yeah, that party is just showing terrifying. It's scary, and they're winning, and they're winning,
and they're doing really well.
Yeah.
So folks, we got a show for you today. Some mostly not happy news, happy topics, but we do feel like it's informative and scrappy for sure. We're going to kick off with this. We'll call it This Week in Radical History, but actually some of what I have is This Month in Radical History. I'll kick it off with because we actually haven't done one of these in a while. On October 5th in 1983, the U.S. invaded the Caribbean island of Grenada, which was to protect U.S. citizens, but we all know it was really to assert U.S. dominance over the region. It was called Operation Urgent Fury. The U.S. administration, which was Ronald Reagan at the time, said it was to protect and evacuate med students who were at a medical school on the island. But it was really just, there's a long history of U.S. force and dominance in the Caribbean, and the U.S., which also had taken some hits in the public eye on foreign policy, most notably a bombing of a Marine barracks in Beirut, was just trying to flex a little muscle and let the world know that there's still a strong armed predator, which is some of what we're going to talk about today. Also, I just do want to note, this is less discussed, but there were 118 offshore banks in St. George's, which is the capital of Grenada, but there's only 7,500 people. And so that's one bank for every 64 people. The Wall Street Journal actually noted in 1991 that St. George's had become a Casablanca of the Caribbean, a fast-growing haven for money laundering, tax evasion, and assorted financial fraud. So there's some of the reason that the U.S. intervenes in, wasn't it Smedley Butler who called himself a muscle for the gangsters of capitalism?
Gangster of capitalism.
Yeah.
The invasion of Grenada was also the best demonstration of the Reagan doctrine, which is that the United States will intervene to protect students whose MCATs weren't good enough to get into any credible law schools. I believe Saul Goodman was going to go there, but then he got into Samoa instead. So
well, he decided to go to the law. He decided to go. He was pre-law. He decided to go pre-law, not pre-med.
Yeah, it's pre-med. That's right. Like what was it? Animal House.
Otter.
Hey,
Eric Stratt.
You're pre-law. You're pre-med. What's the difference?
Exactly.
Anyway, the only real history thing I have today is a reprise of something we did last year, and partly I want to mention this because we're re-releasing it. But last year in October, we did what I think is one of our best shows ever. Like really one of my top three probably, which was a really great show on the 60th anniversary last year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it was like, we used the latest scholarship in it and just utterly just destroyed this whole idea that Kennedy was a peacemaker and that he was going to bring a new world. And it's too bad he's not around right now. Everything would be different, right? But it was one of our best shows where we, just got into the documents and described at fairly narrative basis how the Cuban Missile Crisis really played out and how reckless and provocative JFK actually was during the whole thing. And that took place over the course of a couple of weeks, actually, in October of 1962. And so we'll be reprising that. But I think it's also something to understand because the event itself was obviously of utmost importance because it was one of the times. The other was the 1973 Ramadan or Yom Kippur or October War, whatever you want to call it, where the United States was actually on its highest nuclear alert. And so it's important for that regard, but it's also important, I think, to understand the way history is done, and especially something that we talk about like so much, right? Which is that Kennedy mythology. And the missile crisis is a huge part of that. This is like Oliver Stone says, after the missile crisis, Kennedy had seen the light and he had his road to Damascus and he was going to work for peace from that point on. And we showed undeniably, indisputably, that just was not the case. Kennedy was reckless, he was provocative, and if anybody deserves a pat on the back, it would have been Khrushchev at the time. And of course, the sub-commander, whose name escapes me right now. So anyway, that was 61 years ago this month, and it's worth remembering it. And check us out. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna reissue, reprise that in the best of.
You should by the time you see this, it'll already be up.
Yeah, and it's really one of my favorites. It's something I've worked on a long time. I know quite well. I feel really proud and confident about it. Anyway,
yeah, it's a great episode, and it's very informative, and it's not fabricated or exaggerated history you might hear in other sectors.
Yeah, it's
like Oliver Stone.
You know, David Mamet has written a movie about JFK that's being produced or something now. I don't know what it's about, but Mamet's home. And Mamet will probably love it because he's a Trump guy now. So I don't know. But at any rate, today's scrappy rant, whatever you want to call it, everybody's talking about Gaza, and I don't really have anything meaningful to add to that. It's just so horrifying and horrific. But what does really annoy me, particularly this week, is actually more obviously what's happening in Gaza. It's an atrocity of immense proportions. It is ethnic cleansing. It is a war crime. Any of those words and descriptions apply. But what's really also standing out is the domestic consequences of this. Joe Biden, who's never been popular, is going into a free fall, a really rapid free fall. And it's making it more likely, and in fact, I think likely, that Trump will win in 2024. And when that happens, who's going to get the blame for it? It's going to be the people who've been most loyal and reliable for the Democrats. They're going to get blamed for it, especially in this particular case, young people. And Biden is just, so a new poll came out yesterday. He's down to 37% nationally, which is the lowest he's been. I think it matches as low. But among Democrats, in 2 weeks, he's fallen 11 points. So from 86% approval to 75% approval. The biggest hits he's taken, not surprisingly, are among young people, obviously Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. Even before this, his numbers among Hispanics and African Americans are terrible, right? Which is like blacks are supporting Donald Trump, right? It's just, and we can talk all we want about how crazy Trump supporters are, and there's plenty of evidence there. But when you're supposed to be the opposition party and you don't provide anything for people, and you engage in these kinds of policies, and you start sending $105 billion most recently to Israel and Ukraine, and I think Taiwan gets a little chunk of that too, while you're ignoring just the immense and escalating problems here in the United States. It's real hard to make a case for this guy, and yet they're cramming him down your throat, right? Most Democrats don't want him to run again. It doesn't matter. It's really terrifying because you would think at the White House they would have access to these polls. I don't know, in the New York Times, so I would think they've seen them. And I just like, what? How do they process that? Like they see this and they say, oh shit, we're at 37% and we've lost 11 points, and the kids and African Americans and all these people who usually vote for us, they're pissed off. So let's just keep doing what we do and cram it down your throat.
Even before October 7th, there was this decline in Biden's popularity amongst some of those demographics. Definitely youth are very unhappy with him. He's been balking on student debt relief. He does very little to address the climate. He, green lights big carbon bomb climate projects. It's polls very high as an issue with the climate crisis, polls very high as an issue with under 30s, and healthcare, and honestly medical marijuana, or legalizing marijuana. Yeah, and now they've really dove into an issue which has really upset a lot of people under 30, and that's who carried them in 2022 and 2020 and 2018. That's who was mobilized. And these Senate races that we saw win in places that we didn't think we were going to win them, like in Georgia, that was youth turning out for them. That's how they carried Georgia and Arizona, which had been like longtime Republican states. It's actually pretty amazing the lack of I don't want to even call it tone deafness, but the complete sheer blindness of who's carried them. And they're trying to play to these white suburbanites who have voted Republican in the past and just have a distaste for Trump. So that's how the Clintons and the Bidens and the Obamas think they're going to win. It's where it's been really what we would probably call progressives in the Democratic Party, which have really sort of like held the line. And I have a whole other thing about some of the progressive politicians in the Democratic Party, which are actually also selling those people out too. But we can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, he's looking at I think the analysis, the assumption is that a lot of these, especially young people, if you look at the polling, like people, I believe 44 is one of the cutoffs, the demographic cutoffs. So older people over like 44, 50 or something like that are very supportive of Israel. But below that, not at all, right? And he's basically, I think his assumption is, look, you guys aren't going to vote for Trump. I'm not even worried about you. I don't care. And this was what the Democrats have always done, right? It's the most important election of our lifetime. And it's an existential level, and all the same rhetoric that you've been hearing since 1968, right?
Vote blue no matter who.
And so I think the assumption is like, you guys, you can bitch all you want about me. You're going to vote for me no matter what. And so if I can pull off some of these people who, and there are plenty of Republicans who are disgusted with Donald Trump. Trump did, obviously, he got his guy in as the Speaker of the House. But even congressional Republicans don't represent any longer the majority of the Republican Party. What's really bizarre and creepy is that the GOP establishment is actually harder on Trump, right? People like Mitch McConnell, the GOP Republican senators hate Trump. They want him gone. And Chris Christie, the people running for president, they want Trump gone. Republican media, Wall Street Journal, they want Trump gone. Fox News has been like really hitting Trump hard. Fox News has been covering like how freaking senile Trump is getting, right? They're harder and more accountable, holding Trump to more account than the Democrats are with Biden. Democratic Party, like, we're not going to let anybody else run, and they just cram him down your damn throat.
Yeah, New York Times editorial board is 100% behind Biden and his policies, where you don't see the Wall Street Journal is more behind Biden than Trump.
This is, I think, the last time I joked that this is what a Scoop Jackson presidency would look like. Actually, that's not true, because Jackson would have spent way more money on domestic programs. But Scoop Jackson was a senator from Washington, and one of the ultimate Cold War liberals, like JFK. They called him the senator from Boeing, right? He never met a defense bill he didn't love, and he would always add more to it. And he was like as big a supporter of Israel as anybody in the Senate. Scoop Jackson, Hubert Humphrey, and all those kind of Democrats were always identified with Israel. And what we're seeing now is basically a 1967 presidency, a Six-Day War presidency.
Yeah. And
Biden is just in this time warp where he's still fantasizing about this old coalition with labor. And this is a unique opportunity, right? The UAW just settled on, it seems like, pretty good terms, right?
At least with Ford.
Yeah. And he's pissing this all away. He's just saying, you know what? My priorities are Ukraine and Israel. And let's say Ukraine aside is different, right? But and that war I think needs to end because it's a bloodbath. But Gaza's clear cut. It's not complex. There's such a no, it's not. Gaza's actually pretty easy to figure out. I was like a teenager the first time I read about this. I'm like, oh, this isn't that hard. This makes sense, right? You have an occupying force. And so he's aligned, not just getting involved in Russia and Ukraine clearly carries risks, and it's just an utter huge waste of resources, and it's a risk of widening conflict in Europe. But this is just a war crime, an atrocity of immense proportions. Gaza is about 25 miles long by 5 or 6 miles wide. That's it. That's like a city, like an American city, right? It's not even a big American city. And there's 2 million people in that area. And it's not being alarmist to say that you could see hundreds of thousands or millions. You know, if there's a land invasion of Gaza, it's just surreal. And you're seeing these, like, the sky is lit up with these bombings. They're attacking hospitals. They're killing journalists. Journalists are on the air, and they discover that the families have just been murdered. I know people in Houston who've lost 20, 25 family members, right? Because everybody's packed together in in an apartment building or in a hospital, and Israel is bombing the bottom floors, so the hospital's pancake. It is just a criminal. It violates international law. It violates Nuremberg, and Biden is all in on this. And if you disagree with them, you know what? You're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and not only that, but you're being targeted. Like, you could lose your job. You could lose your speaking engagement. You can lose your platform. And that there's a lot of that happening too. It's interesting that I think the death toll I heard today is about 7,000 killed. And that's what's been put out by the Gaza Health Ministry, which is actually
who can trust the Gaza Health Ministry?
Yeah, but it's amazing. Like, that is like a recognized source of information. Let's just say
that was one of the
Biden administration came out and attacked them.
That's one of the more filthy things he's done. Like, you can't trust the Gaza Health Ministry, which has like an international credibility, and which has actually put out names and identifying information about the people who've been killed. Yeah. And then he says, I'm sure innocents die, but that's what happens. That's one of the problems you have in war, right? And too bad. Today, all these Democrats are weeping crocodile tears about this horrible shooting in Maine, right? And they don't see the connection, like, between violence and the use of force and murder. Hey,
and that shooters supposedly they led shooters into an army reservist, a weapons trainer.
Yeah. Like, you can't condemn what's going on in Maine and then turn around and send $100 billion for weapons to brutalize Gaza. It's just
civilian population.
Gaza's, I don't think, and of course you can't even talk about this, like you said, because you get canceled or you get deplatformed. I mean, it's been on a blockade since 2006. They had an election that Bush and Cameron insisted on an election. They have it. Hamas wins, and they were immediately blockaded. They've been under a blockade for 17 years now.
Yep.
People aren't allowed out. It's one of the longest sieges, maybe the longest siege in world history. It violates like every, and so Gaza is an occupied territory. It has been for 17 years. And to send that level of weaponry, oh my God, today on Facebook or one of those, there was a charity which is raising money for the IDF specifically, not for like Israeli people, but the IDF. Like, they're getting hundreds of billions of dollars from the US, and they're GoFundMing for the Israeli military. It's obscene, it's filthy, and it's terrifying.
And we're also seeing this, like, the Israeli military, haven't they cut off water to Jenin in the West Bank? And
there's no electricity.
And then we're also starting to see
West Bank. There's more violence in the West Bank in the last 3 weeks than there has been, I forget, in the previous, certainly the previous year, this year, but even maybe longer than that. Yeah, the West Bank is you're starting to see more settlements. Yeah, it's
and then also conflict is going up with Hezbollah on the Lebanese border as well.
And 900 American troops arrived today. I don't know what they're doing, but the 900 troops showed up today.
And then also U.S. forces attacked Iran-linked militias or whatever in Syria. And we just did a show with Arthur Pai, who was a journalist who lived in Rojava for a year, which is how the U.S. has like also been playing this sort of game with Turkey and Syria, and the Kurdish militias as well. And so the U.S. is definitely, I think I saw you say this somewhere, Bob, but like Trump wants to foment a civil war while Biden is trying to foment a world war. And, and there's also a secret base that's been revealed in the Negev desert to monitor a potential Iranian attack on Israel, base 512. So it's all pretty disturbing about what's potentially going to happen and how much the U.S. is just like really instigating it. Another war in the Middle East.
Years ago, and I can't remember what the song was, but one of the lines in it was something like, it's like a choice between polio and cancer. And I've used that many times, but like right now we have, and this isn't just a fictional line in a song, it's like we have a choice between civil war and global war or regional war. It's quite amazing. And you mentioned Turkey. Erdogan has condemned the U.S. and Israel for its support. So has the government in Colombia, which I think has expelled the Israeli ambassador. Today at the UN, there was a vote of 120 to 14 calling for a ceasefire. Of course, the U.S. and Israel and some of their puppets voted against it. And Biden is portraying himself, the election strategy, portraying himself as this man who's like restoring America. And the op-ed people in the Washington Post, the New York Times, they eat this shit up, right? Max Boot and all these kinds of people, like, Biden is restoring America's role in the world. And in fact, obviously, quite the opposite is happening. The United States doesn't have a whole lot of credibility or respect to begin with And it's clearly, whatever goodwill it thinks it gained from aiding Ukraine, it's clearly lost twice as much of that now. I don't think people understand, just like Gaza is, there's only two places in the world that feel this way, and it's Israel and the US. The rest of the world, even like Macron and Sunak, or might be supportive. Those countries don't support what Israel's doing, whereas Americans do. And even that's turning. That's really turning. And you have, like you mentioned, progressive politicians like Fetterman has just been abominable on this.
And Sanders.
Yeah, Fetterman's been much worse. Sanders is trying, but Fetterman, the other day, there was a school in Pennsylvania and they wrote Free Palestine on it. And Fetterman said, this is anti-Semitism and blah, blah, blah. And Nikki Haley tweeted out, anti-Zionism is the same as anti-Semitism. And it's really scary stuff. To play that card, anybody who's ever had that thrown at them, like I said, it's a very trivial thing, but I had it thrown at me at Pacifica Radio, the good lefties. And it's something that 20 years later, it's still infuriates me that people would call me anti-Semitic because I criticized Israel. And I'm a nobody. So can you imagine, like, people who are actually losing their job? The editor of a scientific journal retweeted an Onion article, a satirical article. Yeah. And he lost his job.
And in Florida, DeSantis is moving to ban chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine at state colleges.
And you know
saying they're terrorist organ.
Yeah. You know who attacked him for that? Ram Sawani. Ram Sawani said, I agree with you, but you can't do that. That's a violation of their rights. We believe in freedom. It's scary shit. But yeah, the Democratic Party on this one is fully in compliance, fully complicit. Yeah. And Biden is going to lose. And then when it happens, they're going to turn around and look at what they're going to do. They're going to blame. They're still doing that, right? It was Jesse Jackson's fault. It was Al Gore's fault.
Nader's
fault. And it was
Al Gore's fault, actually.
It was Al Gore's fault, actually. Yeah, it was Bernie Sanders' fault, and it was the Greens' fault, and that's what they'll do this time. And when they really don't eat, RFK Jr. is actually probably helping them, right? Yeah. Actually, the Republicans' new line is that RFK Jr. is actually a Democratic plant to hurt Trump, right? Bernie Sanders is just like, hey, can we gloat for a minute about Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, I have a thing to kick off with about Sanders.
Okay, no, I'm sorry. Can we gloat about Cornel West? Is what I meant to say.
Yeah, as long as we can do Bernie Sanders too.
Yeah, of course you can. But Cornel West, and I take no pleasure in this because I actually do think he's a fairly important figure. When he announced his run for presidency, we were among the few people, I think, in left media to say this is a terrible idea. It's just nuts and it doesn't accomplish anything. And it turns out he received a campaign donation from Leonard Leo, who also has given a shit ton of money to Clarence Thomas. And then he left the Green Party, and he's just really looks foolish right now. And it's really embarrassing. And the thing is, if he hadn't done this, he would certainly, and he is a powerful voice for the Palestinians, he always has been. But like his credibility is clearly taken a fairly significant hit. So now what he says about Palestine or anything else doesn't have the same force that it would have if he hadn't undergone this insanity about running for president. And he's embarrassed himself.
Which is a shame, because in 2017 he had a very powerful voice about the Trump presidency and Unite the Right in Charlottesville. And then in 2020, during the uprisings around the police murder of George Floyd, he was quite a powerful voice as well.
I once told one of my wives, if you just listen to me and do everything I say, we'll be fine. Kidding, that's why it's an ex-wife. But if these people would just listen to Green and Red podcast and just do what we say, things would be fine, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
It would be like Three Bubble Up and Rainbow Stew.
The thing I want to hit on, like with Gaza and progressive politicians, is there's two different things here. One is, about a week ago, Jewish Forces for Peace did an occupation of the capital. Hundreds of people risking arrest. It was a very powerful action. Rashida Tlaib, actually, who's the only Palestinian American member of Congress, spoke to them. And so it's led to Marjorie Taylor Greene filing a motion to censor Rashida Tlaib in the House, where it accuses Tlaib of leading an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol complex for speaking to protesters advocating for a ceasefire of the Hamas-Israel war. And so I want to say, just note a couple of things. One, I don't know if the person who actually says that there's Jewish space lasers trying to destroy the country really has any credibility in defending the sovereignty of Israel.
She can call in the gazpacho police.
Exactly. And so I just want, and it's also ironic that a peaceful sit-in in the Capitol Rotunda or whatever is quite different than what the insurrection in which Green helped facilitate in January 6, 2021. So I just want to put that out there. And then the other,
but the thing is, like, how many Democrats you think will vote for it? Obviously, it's going to pass, right?
yeah, because it's have a majority.
There could be a significant number of Democrat votes for that too.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll probably just be a handful of people who vote against it.
Yeah.
Then,
Actually, sorry, let me interrupt for a minute because I just thought of something. You mentioned Rashid Tlaib is the only Palestinian American. The first Palestinian American in Congress was actually Republican Justin Amash, who from Michigan, who's a libertarian. And last week, 3 of very close family members were killed in Gaza, and he's been quite upset about it. So
quite vocal about
it as well. Yeah, and he's more of a libertarian, kind of a Rand Paul foreign policy.
Well, he was actually thinking about running as a libertarian in 2020 against Trump, I believe.
Oh, okay.
In the libertarian ticket, and then he decided.
Oh, Trump caught a break today. Larry Elder's not running against him. He's decided against the campaign. So I'm sure the Trump people are relieved.
Yeah, I'm sure they're breathe a sigh of relief.
But the point was, like, even this Republican congressional congressman has suffered, like, personally, have people die.
Yep. And in the past, we've seen a lot of Arab Americans have actually probably before Bush invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, it was like Arab Americans also trended Republican at some level, right? Correct.
In 2000, I remember, because Houston has a fairly large Arab population. In 2000, they supported Bush because, weirdly enough, I'm not going to go through a long history lesson, Bush and Baker actually probably stood up.
Daddy Bush
especially, but even the kid stood up to Israel probably more than other administrations have. What was the article? You may have even put it out from The Guardian. It was in 2008, I think, where Bush said that explicitly said Gaza has to end Israel has to end the occupation of Gaza. This is George Bush Jr., right?
Yeah.
So
it was right as he was leaving office.
Yeah,
it's true. And I mean, we have also seen where, Baker said, talking about Jewish voters, fuck them, they don't vote us for it. They don't vote for us anyway. Bob Dole, when the Cold War was winding down, actually advocated to have a 10% reduction in military aid to Israel, and the Israel lobby completely shut that down.
Yeah, Ron Paul, the guy who used to be in Congress, he's retired. I've actually spoken to him a couple times, and he said that he and Dennis Kucinich used to work together. So we were always trying to get aid to Israel cut. That was like one of his pet issues. And we will have to do just a show at one point just on, like, why the United States supports Israel so much, because the common idea is it's because of AIPAC, but there's actually so much more to it than that. Yeah. And we also have a couple really good shows going on. We're going to talk to a Palestinian scholar soon, and then we're going to have on one of the best people in the entire English-speaking world who studies the media and Israel and Palestine, Greg Shupak. So we've got a couple really good shows coming up on this stuff. But I'm sorry for interrupting. So.
The other thing I want to say about progressive politicians is that we're still seeing where Jewish Voices for Peace, and If Not Now, and militant anti-Zionist Jewish orgs in the U.S. are going out and doing actions every day. And just yesterday, they did sit-ins on the Hill targeting Hakeem Jeffries and the Democratic Majority Whip, and then a third politician named Bernie Sanders actually had a sit-in. And it's quite interesting because a couple of weeks ago, we actually saw Code Pink do a sit in his office around, I believe, actually support for Ukraine, and all of the progressive left were like, there could have been more of a strategic target. Is really Bernie the person to be going after? All that sort of thing.
That is the person you go after.
Yeah, it is the person you go after. And a lot of those people in the progressive left, if that's what we want to call them, the Jacobin and Majority Report types now are all like, we need to go after Sanders because he doesn't support a ceasefire.
Speaking of the progressive left, go ahead. Speaking of progressive left, the nation is really, like, its descent into being dismal and irrelevant is really accelerated. There was an article in it this week from Morris Isserman, who's a pretty well-known left historian. He's been around a long time. And he's written, like, books on, I think he wrote a book of, like, comparing the old left and the new left. And he wrote this piece in The Nation, which was really slanderous, where he announced that he was leaving DSA, and he's been in DSA forever. DSA used to be something called DSOC, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, and I was actually started a campus chapter of that. And then in DC, I was active in it. And I finally, after a while, didn't take long, just quit going to the meetings and stuff because one issue could not talk about at all was Israel.
Yeah.
And so Morris Sisterman wrote this really slanderous piece, essentially accusing people on the left of being anti-Semitic. And then there was a rejoinder to it, but still, like the fact that the nation is not obliged to portray both sides, especially when one side is so freaking obscene and vile, right? And so I'm sorry, but you're talking about the progressive left, and it's just people who would call them. Today, I was listening to, I don't even know who it was, and the guy started, I was just a podcast pop up in Q, and the guy started, I'm a leftist Jew, and I always thought that I took the side of the Palestinians, and then, and after 30 more seconds, I just turned it off because this has become the new thing. Like, I'm a progressive leftist, or I'm a progressive Jew, or well, you're all anti-Semitic. Yeah. It's terrifying.
Yeah, we saw Naomi Klein do that too a couple of weeks ago.
Who's that?
Naomi Klein did that as well.
Oh, that was horrible. Yeah, no, I've never been the biggest fan of Naomi Klein. She's overhyped, but yeah, it's common, right? It's not quite Amy Schumer, but who put out a really racist, actually, cartoon today on social media. This is really ugly. And then talk about gaslighting. These people who are active in this will then claim they'll put out these really ugly tropes about Muslims, and in their world, everybody is Hamas and everybody deserves to. James Woods basically calling for the annihilation of Gaza. The Woods are putting this stuff out, and then they claim that they're the victims of it all. Like, oh my God, we're under attack, we're under siege. And 50th anniversary, I'm sorry, of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, which is a real example of violent anti-Semitism in America. And who supported those people? Who supported the guy who killed the type of thought? Who supported the type of thought that killed those people? That's a fucking right-wing, crazy anti-Semitic group of people. It's like Trump's people, right? Fine people, right? Yeah. And who grieved and mourned? It was the left. Like, when there is real anti-Semitism out there, the left is always an ally.
Yeah.
And so to suggest that criticizing Israel is now in their world, criticizing Israel is the same as this guy who shot up the synagogue in Pittsburgh. It's so filthy and obscene.
Yeah, it's the division, the attack that we see on people who are critical of a right-wing government, a far-right government, which has occupied territory, which has tortured and murdered people, which is now waging a war of ethnic cleansing and annihilation on a mostly civilian population, and that there are people who call themselves progressives and socialists who are like either being silent or supporting that is completely offensive. It feels like we're in this lost moment, and I'm at a loss. In some ways, I've completely just checked out on it because it's just full of such despair.
Yeah, I actually don't spend a ton of time on Twitter, and I don't have a lot of followers, but the other day I did put something up there that's actually got more response than usual. And I put on, I've been a professor for a long time, and I would say it's not like the Marxists control the academy. That's a joke. Very few people like me. But there's clearly liberals definitely control the academic world. Absolutely. The majority, especially in the humanities, right, are liberal. And I have heard people my whole life, probably the majority of people I've worked with or I've been around, who are professors who speak with incredible passion about workers and African Americans and women. And they they offer panegyrics to Nat Turner and John Brown and the migrants who were killed by the Texas Rangers and the victims of the Indian Wars and the Wobblies. And now in real life, when they have a chance to take this rhetoric, these ideological positions they claim to have, and they have a chance in real life to put that into practice, they support the oppressors. They support Israel, right? And it's not a shock. If you've been in academia and you're on the left, it's not a shock. It's what you expect, but it's really nauseous.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Love me, I'm a liberal.
Love me, love me, love me.
No. So we're going to do, like I said, we have a couple of really good shows on this, and we have other stuff in the queue as well. Right now, the whole world is focused on this issue, and it's just, in its heart, it's very depressing and bleak. And I can't imagine if you have a personal, intimate stake in this. You have people in Gaza, you have people in Palestine. I can't even imagine just the horror, the anxiety, the dread every day. I don't know if it's helping. Israel's split right now 50-50 on whether there should be a land invasion. And I would assume part of that has to be because of the global outcry about this. So keep the pressure up. There's nothing else. You don't want to be alone. You don't want that feeling of solitude. There are a lot of other people out there who think the way that we do.
I will say that it is quite heartening to see how many people much younger than us are against the U.S. and an aid to Israel, against the U.S., against Israel going into Gaza, against what Israel is doing to Gaza right now. It's only something like 25%, 27%, according to one poll I saw, of people under 30 who are actually in favor of this at all.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is just the state of the world has led 50% of people under 30 to identify as socialists. And, that sort of trend has been happening. I actually, these institutions are probably freaking out and trying to figure out how to change that. I guess that's why they're banning thought on campus and stuff, but still.
Yeah. You don't need like some kind of sophisticated theory to understand that Biden is sending hundreds of billions of dollars and focusing all his attention on this like slaughter. And like at home, look at the conditions we have here. Like I always say, Palestine and East Palestine. Biden doesn't give a shit about either one. Places don't have clean water. Places people don't have health care. The education system is in tatters. And the Democratic Party engages in performative bullshit. That's the response to all this. So yeah, it's pretty bleak. But yeah, I'm not shocked at all that given the world these younger people have grown up in, economic crashes and pandemics and terrorist attacks.
And climate crisis.
Yeah, they know that. Yeah, I think they just know that you can't trust anybody. You're on your own, and these people are lying to you. Yeah. Anyway,
folks, definitely check out our repost of our anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis episode, and like we said, we have a couple good episodes coming up on Palestine, and then we actually also will be dropping an episode this week on the LA teacher strike, where we did this pretty fantastic interview with some filmmakers and one of the LA teachers. That's just about ready. It'll be coming out soon as well. And just also to plug it, we also just put out a episode and a webinar about the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, which is something big that's happening here in the Bay Area. So check that out as well. We have a lot of stuff coming out. We have a lot of stuff out, and so we hope you follow us. And if you like it, go and check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you listen to us on the audio platforms, give us a rate and review. It helps us with the algorithms. And if you want to become a donor and support us even more, go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit that support button, or check us out on Patreon. Become a patron at Patreon. And our Patreon is patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And everybody out there should misbehave. There's a lot of people out there misbehaving right now too. Much love and solidarity to all those people sitting in politicians' offices and blocking war profiteering companies, buildings, and all that kind of shit, because that's the kind of stuff we need. And we'll take care and misbehave. Talk to you soon.
Occupation is a hazardous game. If you get your hands dirty, it will burn you like a flame. They want us to bow down, surrender our hometown. They're building colonies, creating a showdown. It's not political or matter analytical. It's plain and straight war crimes targeting civilians. North American Indians, Australian Aboriginals, the people of the land, all wiping to oblivion. It's never right to steal another people's country. Your Ubermensch philosophy has smothered your morality. No fake excuses, no media control can cover up the crime that is vivid to us all. People try just to live their life in peace. For they're occupied, can't control their lives, 'cause they're fighting to be free. Have you heard the story about 1948? I'm sure you heard a story, but not what took place. Ethnic cleansing like the kind you saw in Kosovo, protected by the powerful and treated also lovable. Justice, see, they don't know what that is. Say power is a healthy way of solving this quiz. Military power, economical power, without continuous infusions, it wouldn't last an hour. You better stop breaking our bones. You better stop wrecking our homes. You better stop innocent.
In Palestine, there are people trying just to live their life in peace. Though they're occupied, can't control their lives, 'cause they're fighting to be free.
It's a tragedy of inhumanity. Would you rather close your eyes?
Can't go on this way, just wake up someday, or you will have to pay the price.
People of the world, beware of Zionism. It's a racist ideology of National Socialism. United Nations Resolution 3379. You heard it from the records, but not from our minds. Never give up. We're ready for the fight. We'll never give up. We struggle to survive. We'll never give up. Beloved Palestine, we're rising up to rescue Palestine. Never give up. We're ready for the fight. We'll never give up. We struggle to survive. We're rising up. Intifada, rising up. Intifada.
In Palestine, there are people trying just to live their life in peace. Though they're occupied, can't control their lives, 'cause they're fighting to be free.
We're rising up. We'll never give up. We're rising up. We'll never give up. Intifada. We're rising up. Intifada. We'll never give up. Intifada. We're rising up. Intifada. We'll never give up. We're rising up. 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 We'll never give up.